Mizuki, Naruto had decided, was a totally putz. Spouting off stupidity like that, and come to find out, it would probably get him killed. Why would someone do something like that? Well, when dealing with a person like Mizuki, it was natural that Naruto beat him up when he hurt Iruka. But it was a big surprise when Iruka had given him the man's own forehead protector. He had passed Kage Bushin all the way. There had been a tense situation when Naruto had stood before the Hokage to explain himself, but it seemed like the blonde boy was off the hook. It wasn't until later that night that Naruto remembered the scroll that had popped out of the larger scroll and Naruto had tucked into his pocket. He hadn't meant to keep it, but it just worked out that way, and now it was his. Finders keepers, right? So there he was, alone in his apartment looking at the scroll. Ends up this Daka no Jutsu wasn't just a ninjutsu scroll, it was a scroll to a whole new style of fighting. Long-ranged fighting. And it was all based around this strange pipe and seal combination and a few D&E rank techniques to shape metal into little bits that looked a lot like almond seeds with the butt end cut off. The only problem was that these Daka pieces needed to have a steady supply of metal, but that could be problematic as not every place a ninja would venture would have a steady supply. He had a week before he had to go for his team assignment. That meant he had that long to master this fighting style, and Naruto was completely convinced that he could do so. He was going to be the next Hokage, after all. And so Naruto set to work, put his nose to the grindstone and studied. And failed. The shaping, not an actual elemental jutsu, was more of a chakra control exercise, allowing it to be precisely made. And Naruto sucked at chakra control exercises. This wasn't for lack of trying. For most people, chakra control was like being taught to swim in the shallow end of the pool before gradually paddling to the deep end. Low chakra reserves allowed for more precise control and chakra reserves grew alongside increasing chakra control as the ninja became more experienced. For Naruto, chakra control was like tossing someone who'd lived in the desert all their lives into the ocean and telling them to swim across it to the next continent underwater without coming up for air except on the third full moon of every leap year. Needless to say, this proved to be a little bit of a problem. And so, Naruto came up with an alternative. He used the designs in the scroll to make his own. He used a pipe that used to be part of his broken sink as the barrel. He found an old rusty cigar tin to use as the magazine, an old, heavily blunted kunai for the firing piece, an old table leg he found in the rubbish bin outside his apartment, and a few other bits and pieces here and there to cobble together something like the tool illustrated in the Daka no Jutsu scroll. On the firing piece, he drew a crude, barely acceptable explosive seal, which was then scratched into the metal with a nail. The result was a hideous monstrosity of pure function over fashion that would probably explode the first chance it got. However, the ammunition was more difficult. Naruto tried many things, but none of them worked. He tried carved wood ammunition, but that just exploded in the barrel. He tried balled-up paper, but that just started on fire and made smoke pour out the barrel. Rocks just flew every which way without even coming close to the target, and would often get stuck, forcing Naruto to re-rifle the barrel all over again. And so, he came to a solution that has served many a Naruto in many different incarnations. Kage Bushin, Kage Bushin, Kage Bushin, Kage Bushin. For Naruto, it was dreadfully easy to transform his shadow clones into the tiny metal bullets that were propelled down the barrel at exceedingly high speed and hit things far away. He also discovered that he could see things that the clone munition saw once the clone was dispersed. This allowed him to see exactly what he was hitting. This was rarely the actual intended target. In fact, the abomination Naruto had created was not remotely consistent in its trajectory and would often hit around the target, in at least the same general direction. However, precision was not something this would be using anytime soon. It did, however, have a very satisfying ability to obliterate trees with his clone bullets. Now if only he could hit what he was aiming at. After a week of practice, it was finally time for teams to be assigned. As Naruto and his classmates hung out waiting for their teacher, their instructor was with the Hokage in Naruto's apartment. "So this is the place?" Kakashi asked. "Yes indeed," Sarutobi replied. "Naruto is a very hard worker, but requires a firm hand to guide him. He acts out, but there is real talent in him just waiting to come out." "This milk is bad," Kakashi said half to himself as he picked up the offending carton before glancing at the rest of Naruto's project displayed on the table. Looks like he's following in his parents' footsteps. "Hmm?" asked the Hokage as he turned to look at the failed attempts at exploding tags on the counter. "I didn't know he was working with seals. And inscribing them on kunai is a novel idea, so long as you remember which ones have the seals. Prevents enemies from expecting the explosion. See, an example of his hidden depths. What's with the modern art?" Kakashi asked, pointing towards the monstrosity Naruto had built during the previous week. The Hokage was equally baffled. "Every ninja needs a hobby," the older man suggested. "So you'd better come at me with intent to kill," Kakashi finished the next day. He got the expected, "but we don't want to hurt you," response that he got at least once every time he failed. Tested. A genin team. "Alright," Naruto said, charging off into the bushes before the Jonin could say, "Start." Kakashi let him go. "Begin." Naruto hid in the shadows, tucking himself down low to the ground. Gone was his orange jumpsuit, and underneath was a camouflage bodysuit with a mask that had forest debris stuck to it at strange angles to break up the outline of his body. Shimmying along the ground, Naruto got to a good vantage point and called his clones to act as ammunition. Then he took careful aim at the Jonin, lazily flipping the pages of his porno. The next thing Kakashi knew, a Naruto was flying out of the bushes, apparently appearing out of thin air with a great bang. That echoed throughout the training ground. The Naruto was moving so fast Kakashi barely had enough time to replace himself with a log that was shattered by the raw force of Naruto's blow. As the clone vanished into smoke from the force of it hitting the log, Kakashi sweated slightly. That certainly wasn't in the boy's file. It wasn't long before more Narutos started appearing in an arch preceded by a series of sharp bangs that echoed once more. Trees were obliterated where they struck. Sakura's scream could be heard as she narrowly avoided being crushed by a branch. "Sorry, Sakura-chan," Naruto called out, giving away his position. Kakashi appeared behind him, unfortunately stepping on a branch, giving Naruto time to spin around and point the familiar piece of modern art at the Jonin's body. Luckily for Kakashi, no one using the contraption could have hit the broad side of a barn, even at that range, and therefore survived. Naruto was, however, able to shoot a clone bullet right into the meaty part of Kakashi's thigh. Since it didn't have time to transform back into a person, the bullet went right through the leg and into the ground beyond it, where the clone vanished with a poof of smoke. "What the hell?" Kakashi asked as he strained to keep the blood on the right side of his skin. The blood did not seem to agree and was doing its best to rush out the holes on either side of the man's thigh. Naruto panicked, glancing between the Jonin, the hole in his leg and the bells on his hip. So Naruto did the most logical thing. Made a bunch of clones, took the bells and started marching the Jonin to the medics. Later, Naruto, Sakura and Sasuke were in front of the Hokage, looking a bit sheepish. Well, Naruto looked sheepish, and Sakura managed bashful, but the best Sasuke could do was sullen, which was a step up from his normal personality. "So, your Jonin says you shot him with a bushin," the Hokage began. "Care to explain?" "He told us to come at him with intent to kill," Sasuke grumbled, arms crossed as he enunciated more words than he had in the last year. "Oh, he did he?" Sarutobi asked, his eyes trailing over to where Kakashi was lying in a bed. The one-eyed man shivered under the Hokage's gaze. He left that little fact out of his report, although that could be due to the blood loss from the wound and heavy narcotics they pumped into his system. "And did you attack with intent to kill?" Sakura asked. "Precisely what I'm asking." Sasuke replied, which was a fair approximation of confirmation to any who spent long periods of time with Uchiha. "And you too?" Sarutobi asked. Sakura seemed to shrink under his gaze and shook her head. Naruto, on the other hand, was refusing to meet the old man's gaze. "I'm getting too old for this shit," he thought as he captured the blonde boy's gaze. "Naruto, did you shoot your joint instructor with a clone?" Yeah," Naruto said. "How exactly did you do that?" Sarutobi asked calmly. "With my new technique?" Naruto replied, a little unsure of the answer. "He kinda scared me, and I reacted." "And what technique would that be?" "Daka no Jutsu?" Naruto said sheepishly. He held up the bells. "I got the bells. I'm getting too old for this shit," Sarutobi sighed to himself. "Very well, why don't you three go back home and I'll talk to your Jonin about what happened." As soon as they were gone, Kakashi let out a sigh of relief. I don't know how he did it, or who gave them to him, but Naruto found his mother's unfinished technique, Kakashi told the Hokage. He winced a little as he shifted his weight around. Kushina's technique? The Hokage asked as he sat down next to the masked Jonin. How so? Sensei knew she was working on something. In answer to her weakness in long-range battles, Kakashi said with more than a little bit of awe and horror. The result? Well, it wasn't pretty. If it wasn't for her regeneration, she would have been damn scarred. What happened? Instead of shooting things off in the distance, it blew up in her face, Kakashi explained. She wanted a long-range kunai launcher, but all the seal did was blow up the kunai she was using. Naruto must have fixed it. Fixed it how? He doesn't shoot kunai, he shoots clones that he transforms into other things, Kakashi said with a wince as he gingerly moved his wounded leg. He's just a kid, how'd he figure it out? Well, I think that with many issues with Naruto, that so long as he doesn't know it can't be done, he assumes there's a way, and 9 times out of 10, he figures it out, Sarutobi replied. That and the fact that he makes cages jealous of his chakra capacity, something else he got from his mother. I'll look into how he got the techniques while you prepare your notes on how you're training your team. But I didn't pass them yet, Kakashi protested weakly. And yet they still got the bells, his superior reminded. But I didn't pass them, Kakashi protested. I think being able to disable a Jonin shows that they're up to the task, don't you? Sarutobi commented with a puff of his pipe. Kakashi was not amused, but acquiesced to his superior's decision. Sarutobi left the hospital and made his way back to the Hokage Tower. He slumped into the chair, looked at where the forbidden scroll was hidden inside. I'm getting too old for this shit. Naruto was super happy. His team had passed and he was going to get some help with his new techniques. He was grinning wider than he had grinned since Iruka last paid for his ramen, in other words, a wide, wide smile. He had his Daka launcher propped against his shoulder as he marched down the street towards his favorite eatery. Sliding onto a stool, he set the metal monstrosity down and gleefully ordered a triple-sized portion which he gleefully devoured with the gusto of a ravenous beast. 8-year-old Naruto arrived to the academy exactly on time. This was the first clue Iruka had that told him something was wrong. The next was the bipedal panda in a training GI that walked in right after the boy. Naruto, Iruka said slowly and calmly so as to not provoke the large mammal. Yeah, sensei? Care to explain why you have a panda with you? He's my ninja panda, the blonde boy exclaimed excitedly. Naruto, Iruka began before clenching his eyes shut and pinching the bridge of his nose. Naruto, there's no such thing as ninja pandas. There's ninja dogs, why can't there be ninja pandas? Naruto asked, pointing over to where Kiba and Akamaru were cowering from the giant creature. The tawny-colored dog seemed to be using his human as a shield. Because they don't exist. Now where did you get the panda? Well, it happened like this. Naruto started wiggling his fingers and making doodly noises. Naruto, Iruka asked with a sigh. What are you doing? Entering a flashback. 3 days ago, Naruto came home from a long day at the academy. To be honest, every day felt really long for the hyperactive boy, and this day was no exception. He trudged home, putting one foot in front of the other and slumped into a chair at his kitchen table after starting the ramen water to boiling. And then a giant panda fell through the roof. Naruto gawking, did nothing as the panda stood up, scratched its head, grabbed the near-boiling kettle off the range and poured it all over his head. The panda screamed in pain at the high temperature, but looked down at its paws and started to cry. And I thought that was pretty weird, 'cause I didn't even know pandas could cry, Naruto finished. He grinned up at his teacher, looking for praise that Iruka wasn't sure he should give out. So, a panda fell through your roof and started crying? Iruka begged for clarification. Yup, and then he wrote a few questions on a sign he pulled out of nowhere to communicate, Naruto continued, making the story even less believable. Iruka thought he might regret asking this but he went ahead and did anyway. Just what did he say? Growth. Naruto replied instantly. I mean, what did he write on the sign? Oh, Naruto said. No, my curse is stuck. And, stupid master for sending me here, and, I'm hungry, feed me. He wrote other things later on, but that's what he said that first day except for those questions that I can't remember. Iruka glanced up at the rest of the class to see the panda fighting with Choji over a bag of chips. The panda won, dumping the contents of the bag into his gaping maw as he fended off the pudgy boy with one paw on his forehead as Choji's arms flailed wildly attempting to recover the precious substance. With the exception of the sleeping Shikamaru, the rest of the class was giving the beast a wide berth. This only allowed it to pillage other students' lunches, which it ate rather like a human. Then the panda tried to relieve Sasuke Uchiha of his tomatoes. There was a very brief moment of struggle before Sasuke went flying across the room at very high speeds and the boy's lunch went down the furry critter's gullet. Why are you eating everybody's lunch, Mr. Panda? Hinata Hyuga asked. The panda quickly pulled out a sign. Because I'm hungry, the sign said. Why do you use a sign to talk? She asked. Growth, said the panda a moment before he looked down in aggravation. It turned the sign over and scribbled a bit more. Pandas can't talk. He forgot he couldn't talk? Shikamaru asked, seemingly still asleep. Troublesome. Iruka just shook his head. Naruto, just go sit down with your panda. Yay. After class, Iruka decided to bring the matter before the Hokage. Iruka, what brings the academy instructor here? Naruto play another prank? The old man asked. Well, the instructor paused for a long moment before explaining that yes, Naruto was involved, but that it was a rather different involvement than most were expecting. Go on, the old man told him. And that's how all this has got started, Iruka finished a few minutes later. Fell through the roof of his home? That's what he said repeatedly, Iruka reported. And judging how it threw the Uchiha across the room, it's not a weakling either. As far as I can tell it isn't a genjutsu either, nor any other kind of illusion. I had the class practicing dispelling genjutsu techniques all day just to make sure. So, Naruto really does have a ninja panda, the Hokage mused as he leaned back in his chair, pondering the situation. Of course this also means we need to repair his apartment. Again, and that's how I got a panda. Naruto told Ayame proudly as the blonde boy and the panda sat down to eat. Or they would have both eaten if the panda hadn't stolen Naruto's ramen bit by bit via chopsticks while the boy was telling his story. The panda was hardly sympathetic at the boy's tear-filled face as it poured the rest of the broth down its throat before holding out the bowl for more. Don't worry, Naruto, I'll make you another bowl, Ayame reassured. Thanks, you're the best. Naruto turned to glare at his new ninja animal companion, but the panda just held up a sign that said, "Eat faster next time," and went back to trying to eat Naruto's next bowl. 14 bowls later resulted in a very full panda and a very hungry Naruto. The 16th bowl was untouched by the near comatose panda, allowing Naruto to eat in peace. The next morning, Naruto was awoken at dawn. This was highly unusual. What was even more unusual was the fast-approaching sidewalk as Naruto flew out his window in a classic example of defenestration. What was that for? Naruto demanded as he clung to a ledge on the second floor of the building. Time to train, signed the panda a moment before he kicked Naruto in the face. It was clear that even if he'd been thrown into another world and trapped in his curse form, he wasn't about to stop training. And it just so happened that he had the perfect punching bag that fed him and kept him dry. Ranma was getting pretty ungrateful anyways. He blocked a punch from the blonde kid with a paw, then swept the kid's legs out with a kick. The kid glared at him, but the panda made a "come here" motion and encouraged the kid to attack again. Kill the demon, someone bellowed and the blonde boy hid in the shadows. It was his birthday and everybody wanted to give him a present of cold steel. Shuriken and kunai flew at the 5-year-old with pinpoint accuracy, flying towards his skull. Stop, the boy yelled and the flying weapons did. To the horror and amazement of all present, the weapons hovered in midair, pausing exactly where they were in flight, as if stuck in invisible jello. There was a long moment of silence as the drunken revelers tried to process what they were seeing, but it wasn't long before someone in the back of the mob, someone who couldn't see what was happening, yelled for them to continue the assault. A knife from a kitchen was thrown at the boy over the shoulders of some citizens. Surprised, the boy didn't block this one and it flew right into his shoulder. The sudden pain shocked the boy into action and he screamed as tears streamed down his eyes. He didn't even see the metal as it seemed to melt and curve around him, forming body armor that conformed with his very skin. Metal flew up out of the alley, junk that had been there for years, old kunai, rainpipes, sewer grates and all other types of iron-based detritus. Some moved to protect the boy, to keep him from harm. The rest flew towards the attackers. Naruto, hidden inside his metal shell, didn't see the junk slaughter the nearly 30 people in the mob. He stayed inside his shell, sobbing as the wound in his shoulder healed with unnatural speed due to the only birthday present his father ever gave him. It would be hours before the Hokage would be informed of the attack. He would be informed that Naruto was the aggressor and that they cannot find him. And the latter part was true. Naruto was no longer on the scene, though not of his own volition. "Is that the weapon?" an unknown voice asked, looking at the steel sculpture. "Yes," a second voice replied without inflection. "Begin training in the morning when it wakes up," the first man instructed. Naruto never got lost. Never. The magnetic fields that allowed him to manipulate the actions of iron-based metals also allowed him to be in tune with the larger magnetic fields, something that allowed him to know exactly where he wanted to go. He could sense smaller fields that allowed for echolocation. He could sense the basic shape and size. Kunai and shuriken meant ninjas. Head protectors meant ninjas. And now he was surrounded by ninjas and he didn't know any of them. Almost as soon as he awoke, the strange, unfamiliar, emotionless ninjas began pounding on his shell to extricate him. The pounding hammered repeatedly, keeping no steady beat. Naruto saw light for the first time in a day, and it was bright, even though it was just the interior lights that any office building had. As soon as his shell had been peeled away from his body, Naruto was roughly pulled to his feet. The man holding onto his wrist was tall, with long red-brown hair. The man's face was utterly devoid of emotion. Naruto was used to emotion. Everyone showed emotion, even if it was anger. Naruto was dragged from the room to a larger one with a mat in the middle. On the other side of the room, a short, purple-haired girl cowering in fear. She was beaten, repeatedly, and the bruises were clearly that of an adult's fist, judging by the size, and Naruto knew about bruises far too well for a boy his age. "Weapon," the man said, clearly addressing Naruto. "Kill that girl. I don't want to be here." "Where's the old man?" Naruto demanded. The auburn-haired man struck the boy sharply across the mouth. "Weapon, kill that girl. No, bring me to the old man." Naruto bellowed. The pieces of steel in the man's leg pouch started to shiver as if alive, as if they were begging to be released. "Weapon, kill that girl." The glass mirror on one wall shattered as the steel frame twisted and bent. The onlooker took one startled step backwards, his near-legendary composure broken for the moment. The concrete walls buckled as the rebar that ran their length writhed like snakes under the boy's unknowing control. "No, I want Old Man Hokage." Naruto bellowed in both fear and rage, the stress of being attacked and then awakening in a strange place finally catching up to him. All over Konoha, metal objects started aligning with the boy's location. The magnetic fields the boy was putting out pulled them closer, no matter if they were simple tools, children's toys or other objects. Sarutobi, worried about Naruto, having had his Anbu out looking for the boy, sat back in surprise as his steel and wood pipe flew from his hand to point downward. Compasses pointed directly to the new magnetic pole, the direction only shifting as the source of the disturbance fled from the ground using his powers to punch a hole through the earth and floors above him. It appeared to all witnesses that the metal from within simply bowed to him, letting him pass like Hyuga branch house members when confronted by an angry main house elder. Sarutobi jumped from the window and sprinted across rooftops, following his pipe as it, and so many other small objects flew towards the source. Like kunai thrown by a jonin, the metal bits sank deeply into the intervening layers, allowing any ninja to easily pass through the resulting rubble. The Hokage only had to sink down 2 levels before he met Naruto coming up towards him. As soon as the tiny 5-year-old saw the only man he knew he could trust, Naruto threw himself at the old man. Tears ran down his face as he clutched onto the old man like a lifeline, the only stability and sense of safety of the boy's young life. "I knew it," the boy sobbed into the old man's robes. "I knew you'd save me." Still kneeling to allow the boy to hold onto him, Sarutobi looked up towards his Anbu. "I want to know what happened, and what really happened. I want to know about the alley and I want to know about this secret base, that I, the Hokage, was not aware of. You may gain this information with as much prejudice as needed, Kakashi." The masked man bowed before he vanished in a swirl of leaves. It wasn't hard for Kakashi to backtrack to where Naruto had been held. The hold built of the construction materials of the former subterranean base had been molded to the boy's will, allowing the Anbu to find the hideout without a sound. Trapped amongst the rubble were 5 people, 1 traumatized little girl and 4 adults. The girl was fine, but the men were pinned by steel rebar that folded itself back into the walls. Kakashi just knocked the girl out with a genjutsu. Almost lazily, Kakashi let his eyes fall on the ninja who looked back without emotion or identifiable reaction. He turned his head slowly, seeing another man lurking in the shadows. There was a spike of chakra and Kakashi was in action. Surprised by the masked ninja's almost instantaneous change in behavior, the hidden ninja's head didn't go far when its connection to the neck was severed. The other 3 men struggled just as hard and with as much success. While their master must have been connected enough to escape, these 3 would do perfectly well as guests of Ibiki. As the years passed, Naruto began to distance himself from the world that shunned him, soon having no desire to be in the company of anyone other than the Hokage and a few other select people. He did not actively hunt or intend to kill, but simply acted coldly to all who accosted him. He was still as of yet, unaware of what he had done, and it was all well and good, so far as Sarutobi was concerned. Naruto still intended on becoming a ninja, although this was less for recognition and more with the intent on protecting the old man. He could care less about the other villagers. Why would he need a playmate when metal would bow to his every whim? Where other kids had wood blocks, Naruto was given various shapes cast in metal, often the roughest available, but the quality mattered little to Naruto. Outside of the Hokage himself, Naruto was his own companion. Sarutobi, however, was worried about this cold, closed-off Naruto. As much as he didn't want to think such thoughts, he found himself pondering what would happen should this Naruto lose control if one of the clan students went too far. This new Naruto did not take well to bullying. After long deliberations, the Hokage decided to train Naruto himself, or at least enough to allow the boy to pass the academy examinations. It was quickly discovered that Naruto's strengths were in his massive chakra capacity and his bloodline. Should the boy master his abilities, he would be near unstoppable. But before that, he needed chakra control. Kal-El, my son, my only son, the recording said. As I say these words, my world is crumbling. The council ignored my warnings and now Krypton, the world of your birth, is dying. You are my last hope. The world that I am sending you is primitive, but they hold great promise. There is little time left for me, but I have included all my memories and the whole knowledge of Krypton in this crystal palace. I hope that one day it will become your fortress of solitude. The young man with black hair and blue eyes ran a tired hand through his hair and let loose a great sigh. How troublesome. 13 years earlier, the Kyuubi is attacking. Someone screamed. The Naris ran, Shikaku protecting his very pregnant wife from debris as they ran through the streets of Konoha. It wouldn't be long now before the giant fox breached the very walls of the village of the Hidden Leaf. Then, just as Minato, the 4th Hokage, rode out on Gamabunta to confront the massive beast, the sky exploded with flames. The sky was filled with burning green rocks, flying from who knows where, pummeling fox and human alike. Then, in the midst of it all, a silver object slammed on the fox's head, knocking it out cold. The silver object bounced, spun and skidded to a halt right in front of the Nara family. It opened with a hiss, revealing a baby smiling up at them. They looked at the spaceship. They looked at the unconscious fox. And then they looked at the sky as the last of the green projectiles fell to earth. Shikaku shrugged. The orphanage paperwork would be too troublesome to fill out, he commented before holding the baby in his arms. Said baby grabbed his finger and promptly broke it. Wincing, the older ninja pondered how troublesome his life would become. Shikamaru, Doyua, come to the table, their mother demanded. The 2 boys, both about the same size at Shikamaru's 5 years, which they had also adopted for their adopted son, because it would be too troublesome to celebrate 2 birthdays, grumbled quietly as they sat up from their cloud watching. They diligently ate breakfast and made their way to their first day at the academy. Once there, Shikamaru promptly nodded off, but Doyua found it impossible to sleep with the sun out. Instead, the boy spent the entire day playing a shogi game in his head against an imaginary opponent. When they were 6, they discovered that Doyua was much stronger than anyone else in his year. Mizuki-sensei discovered this the hard way when he was thrown out the wall of the classroom, out the window, over the next building and fell with a crash right outside the Ichiraku ramen bar. The blue-eyed Nara boy was also much faster than anyone else in his year and at one point accidentally found himself in wave. It took him a few days to get back, but it was too troublesome to explain to his mother where he'd been for the better part of the last week. When they were 7, the two Nara boys received a shogi board for their birthday. They ignored Iruka for the rest of the year and just played against each other. When they were 8, not much happened except for the Uchiha kid turning emo. Ends up there was some trouble in his clan's compound. Shikamaru and Doyua just played shogi. When they were 9, their father retired because he had decided it was more fun to feed deer than be a ninja. When they were 10, 2 things of importance happened. First, Doyua discovered that weapons couldn't cut him and that, having fallen asleep one night on the top of the Konoha monument, falling several hundred meters didn't hurt him. The second was that the Nara boys discovered Go. They decided to play both Go and shogi at the same time. When they were 11, a loudmouthed blonde joined their class, having failed the exit examination for the second time. He was quite the prankster. They graduated when they were 12. Shikamaru was put on a team with Ino and Choji, offspring of his father's teammates. Doyua was put together with some other people whose names were too troublesome for the author to make up. His team failed the teamwork test because it was too easy for him to succeed on his own, but too troublesome for him to bother with. Shikaku decided to train his adopted son himself. When they got to the family training ground, Doyua tripped over his spaceship that was now half buried in the ground. He raised an eyebrow as a way of asking for an explanation. Shikaku sighed. It's too troublesome to explain. Go ask your mother. And that was how Doyua discovered he was an alien. There was a minor incident when Doyua knocked out a giant raccoon, but other than that, not too much happened for the rest of their 12th year. They turned 13 after Shikamaru made Chunin, and Doyua was given a place on a team with other people who were also too troublesome for the author to make up names for. And one day after practice, Doyua was going through his spaceship and found a crystal. Giving it a little shake, the boy absently tossed it behind him. A rumbling started up and soon a big crystal palace grew from the ground. The deer looked at it, then looked at him for an explanation. The boy just scratched his head and walked inside. And that brings us to the beginning of this FIC. I expected you to build this in some out-of-the-way place, like the Arctic, Jor-El commented, obviously confused as to why the Fortress of Solitude was in some family's backyard. It would be too troublesome to go that far. Soon his parents came home. Doyua, honey, why is there a giant building made out of crystal in our backyard? Doyua looked at his mother, turned and looked at the fortress. Then he looked at the ground and scratched his head. It's too troublesome to explain. The old guy inside knows it better than me, the boy said. His mother quickly forced him to give the entire story. When the Sound Ford took off with Sasuke so he could betray them, Doyua discovered that he could fly and shoot fire from his eyes. So did Sasuke, in a rather permanent fashion. The Hokage convinced him that it wasn't too troublesome to explain exactly what happened. Years and years later, after Akatsuki and the Fourth Shinobi War and all that canon stuff that the author finds too troublesome to recant. Kneel before Zod. Sigh. No, because getting back up off the floor after is just too troublesome. Tsunade sat at the end of a very long table with Konoha's council. They were wearing their sucking up faces that she recognized so well from when she was growing up. Being a senju, the last senju no less, meant that everybody either wanted to get into her pants or her pocketbook or both. It seemed that taking after her grandfather and great-uncle hadn't changed things. If anything, it made the sucking up even worse. She smiled and nodded as they went on about how great they were and how important their jobs were to the whole village. They went on and on about how powerful they were, reminding her on how the council had gained power since the Third Shinobi War. Then one said something wrong. And now that Sarutobi is gone, we can finally get rid of the demon brat, he said. The council froze, not quite sure of her reaction, but Tsunade was on her feet and at the other end of the table before anyone could blink, reminding them that she was still a ninja. It took nothing more than a flick of her finger to sever the man's head, sending it flying up in the air. She snatched it with one hand and started to slowly walk around the table like a cat stalking its prey. Thank you for being here, and I appreciate your assistance in these troubled times, she said in a sweet, calm voice. And I encourage you, all of you, to come to me if you have problems with how things are run, and I assure you no topic is taboo. She glanced around the table and let her voice sharpen. Except if you consort with traitors or talk trash about the only reason I'm back in the village. And if you insist, I collect your fucking head. She held up the head for all to see, eliciting gasps of horror at the sight. Just like this fucker here. Her sweet, so sweet smile returned and she glanced about the council table. Any questions? It had taken him years to perfect. After time and time of getting his butt handed to him by Sasuke, Obito, Tobi, Itachi, Madara and the 50-something other last Uchihas that popped up out of the woodwork. Honestly, he'd stopped even trying to remember their names. Finally, he had the technique that beat the ultimate technique. This was something like Sasuke's surrogate son, the third or fourth that had been born during Sasuke's time as Orochimaru's apprentice. Like his father, his uncle, and ancestors, this had killed his best friend, sibling, cousin, parent, tomato gardener, masseuse, pet sitter and gained the Mary Sue steal again. That wasn't the real name, but Hokage Naruto Uzumaki didn't really care. The battle started with fire. Uchihas almost always start with fire unless they just started tossing out the big red eyes. After seeing Naruto totally kick his ass with wind, which was theoretically weak to fire, he inevitably turned on the Sharingan's full blast. Normally in battle, Naruto would just use his "don't be douchebag" no jutsu, which quickly turned enemies into allies, but it never seemed to work against Uchiha. Worked great against pretty much everyone else, even Hyuga, but never against an Uchiha. But Naruto was ready. He held out his 4 and middle fingers, spaced them out and charged, screaming, "Nyuk nyuk nyuk," all the way. As expected, the stooge no jutsu worked perfectly, forcing the boy to cover his pained eyeballs with his hands. Throwing a paper bag over the guy's head, Naruto then beat the most recent, last Uchiha, repeatedly until he stopped moving. "See, I told you it would work," Naruto said to his head of the medical corps, the Jonin commander, and Anbu captain. Sakura, Shikamaru and Neji just sighed and shook their heads. "I believed in you, Hinata," his head of T and I said. She did not, however, say she believed in the technique. "Thank you," Naruto said before picking up the unconscious Uchiha. "Now let's see where this guy was born and why he showed up." Danzo was the 5th Hokage, but not how he had expected it to come about. On this October 11th, the one-eyed man was simply the only choice after Jiraiya refused. The 4th and 3rd had died the previous night after the damn fox escaped its prison. Luckily it had quickly been sealed into a new container that was currently rolling around fitfully in his sleep in a basket on the Hokage's desk. The fact that it was sleeping at all was only due to a genjutsu, otherwise the child would still be screaming as it had for several hours previous. The infant, not even 24 hours old, was the container of the most powerful tailed beast. "Naruto, Naruto, Naruto," the man muttered under his breath, pondering the situation. "What am I going to do with you?" Rumors had escaped, of course. The villagers knew that a child was the new container, and civilians, being uneducated idiots, thought that it was just a new form for the demon. When Anbu and Root first heard the rumors, Danzo had quickly set up 14 different counter-rumors and instructed off-duty Anbu to spread them, allowing only a few to know the truth. 9 of those rumors focused attention on the greater clans of Konoha, specifically on their children, though only descriptions of the children were given, not names. Danzo felt this was especially important, considering there was strong evidence that at least one of the clans was responsible for revealing Naruto's status to the general populace. The misinformation would keep any one child from being persecuted and prevent the information from being considered credible to other factions, nations and villages. It was enticing to have the boy trained as a weapon, but now that it was his choice, Danzo wasn't so sure it was the correct choice. The 4th was not a soft man. Kindly, yes, but no one could ever accuse him of being weak-willed or soft. He had become a legend in just a few small years and was easily the most powerful Kage since the first Hokage, outstripping most others who had held similar titles. He was a man Danzo had learned to respect, even if it took some time at first. He glanced at the basket on his desk. That boy could easily become his father's equal if trained properly, something that Root and Anbu were not equipped to deal with. There was a reason that Root recruited at no earlier than age 5. There had been attempts in other villages at raising infants to be emotionless drones, but they were inevitably failures as the children were unable to function in most situations outside of training and almost always broke. The greats, the legends, even those who were best at suppressing their emotions, were raised to be people. Treating an infant like he did his root would only give him an unstable child with a malicious creature inside of him. One only had to look at Tsuna or Kumo's past failures to know that was a bad idea. While the latest container of the ox was stable, the others were not, lasting little more than a year at most, a few weeks for the least. No, Danzo would have to go another route. He pulled out a pair of new mission scrolls. Wetting a brush with ink, he set about filling them in. Glancing around his new office after the task was complete, he stood up and made his way to the window. "Get me Jiraiya," he commanded simply. The only sign that his route had been there at all was a slightly unnatural breeze and a single leaf spiraling in the wind. The old scarred man didn't have to wait long. "Danzo," Jiraiya said unhappily. The fifth Hokage could see the displeasure and borderline disrespect in the man's eyes. It did not take a genius to know the man did not approve of Danzo's appointment, but that was his own fault for refusing the position. "Jiraiya," Danzo said, handing the man 2 scrolls. "These are your orders. They are to be completed immediately." "Orders? We both know I've been running my network and I cannot ignore it for long," the Toad Summoner replied, barely keeping his temper in check. "The situation here is unstable," Danzo replied, staring out at the Konoha monument where his face would soon be carved. "There is no discipline, no order. If I had not acted quickly, rumors of the situation would have nearly started riots. I'm currently tracking down the leak." "To shut it off?" Jiraiya asked, surreptitiously glancing at his godson. "To plug it with a kunai, if necessary," Danzo corrected. "The child cannot allowed to die, nor can it be just thrown into an orphanage as if it is just another infant turned orphan like the others. Rumors die out, but truth stands tall." He turned to stare darkly at the younger man. "The truth will come out, hopefully when I want it to, but recent events suggest that is unlikely. You are to read those scrolls and follow them to the letter." Jiraiya opened the first scroll and looked up in shock, his gaze shifting between the basket and Danzo. "You want me to take him to the Toads?" "Yes," Danzo said. "The Toads, so long as they are allies to the leaf, make us strong. This is a symbol of trust between us, and added protection for the child. When the time is right, he will be trained and eventually brought back." "The Toads are great allies," Jiraiya said carefully, "but they know almost nothing about humans. They aren't prepared for caring for a child, even less so than I am. Food, cleaning, training, it's all far from what he needs." "I've already selected a wet nurse," Danzo replied. "The other scroll is for the boy's caretaker. I assume I'm to take them along for a reverse summoning?" Jiraiya inquired. "Yes, I'm sure you can convince the Toads to assist us in this," Danzo said in a voice that made it clear failure was not an option. "Oh, and inform the caretaker that she and her apprentice will be hunted down as missing ninjas if they do not comply." Jiraiya shot him a dark look, but nodded and vanished in a swirl of leaves and wind. Danzo picked up a third scroll from his desk and passed it to a hidden Anbu. "Retrieve her." The Uchiha clan was not used to dealing with outsiders. This might seem strange on some level, but as one of the 2 founding clans, the Uchiha had enjoyed a certain amount of autonomy for most of Konoha's existence. So when an Anbu appeared in the middle of a clan meeting and walked up to the clan head's wife, they were rather disturbed. "What is the meaning of this disruption?" demanded one elder, his eyes already spinning red. The Anbu moved nothing but his head, the animal mask staring at the man with no hint of emotion. "Makoto Uchiha, you have been reactivated," the Anbu said in perfect monotone. The uproar was instantaneous, the entire clan yelling in outrage at the idea of the interruption, and the reactivation of a retired mother only added to it. "But she said in stunned response, holding her infant son to her chest. "You are ordered to report to the Hokage immediately," the Anbu said, cutting her off. "Failure to comply will be considered an act of treason by the Uchiha clan and dealt with appropriately." The clan elders might have been screaming in outrage, but the ANB used ninja to cut off the discussion, the blade touching the neck of the first elder to stand up. "Jonin Makoto Uchiha, you're to follow the directions in this scroll explicitly. Do you understand your orders as I have relayed them?" "Yes, I do," Makoto replied with a slight bow. The man vanished as quickly as he arrived. She clutched Sasuke to her chest and left the room without even glancing at her fellow Uchiha. The orders were formal, direct, and slightly horrific. Makoto read them in shock as she fed Sasuke. She had orders to pack for her and her infant son, but nothing else. Other than to the Hokage's office, no one would know where she was going. Judging by the secrecy, it was an infiltration mission that required a recent mother, but there was little to support that theory. With Danzo as the new Hokage, it could easily be anything. If it had been the third or the fourth, she might have been able to convince them to choose someone else, but Danzo always had several levels to everything he did. While with Sarutobi, one might have to look underneath the underneath. With Danzo, one would have to look underneath the underneath to find a clue that was probably a false trail, so you do the opposite and discover something that doesn't make sense unless you stand on your head at 3:47 a.m. and look at the new clue to find what was underneath the underneath of that. The man lived and breathed ninja politics in the worst way, especially since he was fanatically loyal to Konoha. Unfortunately, she was overcomplicating the situation. Sometimes you need a precision tool for a specific job. Sometimes you can just use a blunt hammer, which is exactly what Danzo had just done. It was the first swing in hammering down the Uchiha nail, something Danzo had felt needed to be done for decades. Makoto was the only Uchiha to have given birth in the last 8 years, her first being born almost exactly 9 months after the peace treaty that ended the Third Shinobi War. Danzo was, in his own way, being rather blunt by choosing the clan head's wife for the task. By reminding them that any Jonin, regardless of situation, could be recalled, the one-eyed man was telling them that he was Hokage, that he was the power in Konoha, not the Uchiha clan. She packed her things, sealing all of hers into one scroll and all of Sasuke's into another, pausing only to burp the baby. She left a quick note for her husband, who was already on his way to protest against the orders. She made her way through the streets, clutching Sasuke to her chest the entire way. Itachi would lose his mother as surely if she were dead. It pained her to think of what would happen to the boy without her influence to temper Fugaku's stern and occasionally volatile nature. This is an outrage, Fugaku screamed at the Hokage. Danzo looked up with his one eye. It wasn't a glare, it was more of an appraisal. Danzo inspected Fugaku and found him wanting, like someone looking at a carton of milk past its sell-by date. He never stopped looking at the ranting Uchiha when he spoke to his hidden bodyguards. If he activates the Sharingan, kill him, Danzo said, staring quite specifically at the man's nose. Fugaku looked at the newly appointed Hokage with horror, the rant DOA mid-sentence at the old man's words. Are you done? Danzo pushed himself upright with his cane. Perhaps I was too subtle for the Uchiha, he said, looking at the monument once more. Or perhaps I was not subtle enough. He turned around to face his verbal assailant. Funny how the Uchiha clan suffered so few casualties yesterday. Fugaku stopped, pondering what the statement could mean. Danzo continued. Interesting considering who was responsible for the only other time the fox attacked Konoha. Danzo could almost hear the gears grinding in the prideful man's head. I wonder how long it will take the community at large to note similar observations. He paused a moment. After all, one would think that Fugaku Uchiha was Hokage instead of me with the way he came in here and ranted. One might reach the conclusion that he feels the ninja rules don't apply to the Uchiha clan. He turned and stared challengingly at the man. Do you, Uchiha? Do you think you don't have to answer to the Hokage? Do the Uchiha think they're a separate village that only shares a few walls with Konoha? The man's previously flushed face turned pale. No, Hokage, Fugaku said quickly. No, what? Fugaku, swallowing his pride as if it were a sea urchin, spines, shell and all, answered quickly. No, the Uchiha clan does not believe we are a separate village in Konoha. Good, Danzo said, because it isn't. He nodded towards the door. Your clan had best remember that, because I won't forget it. Fugaku bowed with precisely the correct amount for a Hokage, turned and left the room without another word. It was disturbingly easy for Jiraiya to find his target. Unlike other instances when Sarutobi or Minato had asked him to look for her, it had taken weeks, sometimes up to a month. This time she was exactly where he thought she'd be. At the Fire Country Sake Festival, a week-long celebration of booze and losing money, though the latter was a bit more of an informal celebration. Tsunade was right where he thought she'd be. He hadn't been able to properly mourn for his sensei, his student and Kushina. There hadn't been enough time. He knew that someday soon it would hit him and he'd cope like he always did. Get extra stinking drunk and get laid. But for the immediate future, he had a mission to complete. "Hey," he said, slipping into the seat across from his old teammate. "What do you want?" the blonde woman demanded, her booze threatening to slosh out of its saucer. Jiraiya handed her the scroll, though she probably wouldn't be able to read it until she sobered up. "New orders from the Hokage," he said simply. "What, does your brat of a student think he's going to change my mind?" Tsunade asked drunkenly. "Minato is dead," Jiraiya said flatly. "Sarutobi-sensei as well." She grunted and slipped the half-full saucer up to her lips. "Always knew that job was a death sentence. You can take it back. I'm done with Konoha. The 5th Hokage, Danzo Shimura, has commanded me to inform you that if you do not agree to this mission, you and your apprentice will be considered missing ninjas and treated accordingly," Jiraiya explained flatly. His old teammate's eyes grew hard. "I'm not joking, Tsunade. I never thought the Fire Lord would choose him after I turned the hat down." "How long?" she asked. "How long what? How long ago did this happen?" she elaborated. Jiraiya sighed and ran his hands over his face, feeling every line, scar and crease. "Damn, I was sure rumor would have arrived ahead of me," Jiraiya mumbled as he poured himself a saucer from Tsunade's bottle. He swallowed the entire thing in one gulp, grimacing at the rather poor quality. "3 days ago, your grandmother's successor's seal failed during labor. Sensei and Minato sacrificed themselves to protect Konoha and transfer the package to a new courier." He refilled the saucer. "I was asked an hour afterward the transfer. Danzo accepted 10 minutes after I refused." "And how long are you going to give me to run?" Tsunade asked. "None at all," Jiraiya replied coldly. "Take the damn mission, Haim. Don't make me kill you, and you know I'd have to." She looked at him with confusion, as if she couldn't believe that he would actually go through with it. "I don't like that they chose Danzo." "You don't like that they chose Danzo. But they chose Danzo. He is Hokage, not me, not you, not Minato, not Sarutobi-sensei, not your great-uncle, and not your grandfather." "Danzo. Why me?" Tsunade asked. "You know as well as I do that any special Jonin and up can be reactivated at any time." "He's not playing around," Jiraiya said, setting the saucer down. "He's still the same warhawk he's always been, only this time he's got the hat and the Fire Lord's blessing. He's not going to be as soft with you as Sensei or Minato were. He's consolidating his power within and without the walls of Konoha. He won't show weakness. You, regardless if you think so, could be a threat to him, so he's not so subtly putting you in your place." "I won't go back to Konoha," Tsunade said. "There's nothing there for me." Jiraiya pushed the scroll across the table and stood up. "Read the orders. I'll be back tomorrow when you're sober," he said. She grunted at his back and he glanced at her over his shoulder. "Tsunade, don't try to run." "Really?" Tsunade looked at the scroll. She hadn't opened it yet, just sat in her room, staring at the rolled-up paper. It was the slightly yellowed paper that came from Konoha, something to do with the trees started by her grandfather, the first Hokage. Along one side was a red band that she knew ran the full length of the scroll when unfurled. Fire red, the colors of the Hokage, a special hue which no one else in Fire Country was allowed to use. She'd received them before, for missions and such. But then they had always been from Sarutobi, her childhood sensei and Hokage. She barely remembered her great-uncle's reign. She'd not really been able to spend time with the man since he was so busy. Her own sensei had become Hokage when she was a freshly minted Chunin in the midst of that particular war. Things had been different then. It was not uncommon for a Jonin instructor to be taken away from his or her genin to join up with their old team for missions. She'd been training at the hospital when her great-uncle died. She didn't even know until Sarutobi was wearing the hat. It had been decades since then. So much had happened. More wars. Loved ones found. Loved ones dead. Travels with her apprentice. Drinking and losing money. Losing lots of money. With a deep sigh, she pulled the scroll towards her and bit her thumb, careful not to look at the blood. Closing her eyes, she spread the blood across the edge and waited for the seal to open. She took a deep breath, then another. She channeled chakra through her thumb and wiped the remaining blood away before opening her eyes. Tsunade Senju read the scroll and grimaced. Looks like she'd be headed back to Konoha after all. Sarutobi sighed as he slowly sat down behind his desk. He took a sip of his tea and nodded to the people waiting across from him. Go ahead. As far as we can tell, it was just an accident, Shikaku Nara began. Uzumaki just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. It seems he was planning on pranking the Uchiha police for something when the Kumo ambassador ran right through with the Hyuga heiress. The prank covered the ambassador in neon orange paint, which allowed us to track him much faster than we would have otherwise, Kakashi explained from behind his Anbu mask. The ambassador, thinking it was an attack, threw a shuriken at Naruto, hitting him in the chest. We were able to apprehend the ambassador without killing, but Naruto just barely made it to the hospital in time. What is the prognosis? The third Hokage asked, turning to the head Medi Nin. If he was not an Uzumaki or a Jinchuriki, he would be dead already, the doctor replied. The shuriken appears to have shattered on impact. Inspection seems to suggest this was intended in manufacture, and the pieces have been healed around. Were they not so close to his heart, I'd suggest chakra suppression seals and surgery, but right now the healing factor is the only thing keeping him alive. If Tsunade were here. He paused and shook his head. If I were to operate, I'd give Uzumaki a 10% chance of survival. And because of his prisoner, we can't take that chance, Sarutobi grumbled, slumping back into his chair. Danzo, sitting in the back corner growled lowly, the sound echoing the feelings of the others present. The loss of a Jinchuriki was terrible, but at the same time he had no desire to be responsible for destroying Konoha. Can he be a ninja? Kakashi asked the doctor. He could, but chakra exhaustion, chakra absorption or other effects could kill him, the doctor replied. A sufficient wound to the chest could do the same. He would die and the demon would escape or disperse and reform elsewhere. Either way, we chance another village acquiring the demon to use against us. Something we absolutely cannot allow to happen, Danzo said. Why not just take the demon and put it in a new container? If Sarutobi had looked tired before, that weariness was gone, replaced by fury. I will not sacrifice a child's life for expediency, the Hokage growled, his eyes burning holes through the others in the room. Not to mention that only Uzumaki have ever been able to contain the fox. There is also the issue that the last time the fox was resealed, it cost us a Hokage, if I might remind you. The others in the room shifted nervously, slipping with subtle steps to the side so they weren't in the crossfire. Danzo, as he always did, broke eye contact first. Sarutobi relaxed a bit. Might I suggest something? Shikaku put in. Go ahead, the Hokage instructed. The Nara head turned to the doctor. Can he still safely channel chakra? I don't see why not, so long as he doesn't put himself in harm's way, the doctor replied. Shikaku smiled and turned back to his Hokage. While Uzumaki cannot be a ninja, he likewise can never be a civilian. Not really, the Nara head began. He'll never be a civilian shopkeeper or a businessman, not with the way the civilians treat him. They won't even give him a chance, so why don't we channel his already large chakra reserves to something useful? His family has all had skill in sealing, so perhaps he could be our sealing expert? We also always need blacksmiths, and a blacksmith trained in the sealing arts is incredibly valuable. He'll still be helping the village, but not necessarily as a ninja, Sarutobi said. That could work. We always need assistance on the village walls, replacing and repairing seals. If he's good enough, we could even develop our answer to the 7 swordsmen of the mist, Kakashi put in. Everyone perked up at that thought. Those weapons were legends and tended to be some of the nastiest things to face on the battlefield. To have a viable counter would be incredible, but well worth the cost. Even Danzo thought this might be a good idea. While strenuous, I don't think blacksmithing would adversely affect his condition, the doctor said. So long as he waits until he is a bit older, as he is rather small for his age at the moment. Very well, Sarutobi said. I will begin his training myself. I think I can convince a few of our other sealing masters, including my old student, to give lessons here and there. Years later, buy a Yame, Naruto said, throwing his cash on the counter with a healthy tip. Gone so soon? She asked, giving him a big smile. He smiled and stretched his arms. He had also built up a healthy set of muscles in his shoulders and arms from working the forge, however his skin was pristine and soft, not a scar or callus to be found, thanks to his prisoner. Along with this, at 14 Naruto was tall for his age, often mistaken for 15 or 16. His hair was still a spiky blonde dandelion puff. his eyes still bright blue and the whisker marks plain against his face. "I have to get back to work," he said ruefully. "But you can bet I'll be back tomorrow for lunch." "Well, I'll have to wait to see you then," she said warmly. "You bet." As soon as Naruto stood up, a yellow bird with a black mask across its eyes and beak popped out of his hair. "Done procuring sustenance, sir?" the masked weaver bird asked as it jumped down and perched on his shoulder. "Might I suggest inviting the young lady back to your abode so she may view the quality of your living quarters?" "Yari," Naruto said tiredly, glancing up to hope Ayame hadn't heard the bird's statement. He glanced at his shoulder and hissed lowly. "I told you. She's like a big sister to me." "Indubitably, sir. However, might I also remind sir of your conversation with Hokage Sarutobi just last week?" Yari replied. Naruto decided to play stupid as he waved goodbye and started on his way down the street. "Was that the one where he complained about me eating too much ramen?" Naruto pondered aloud. Truth, it was a conversation they'd had before, with Naruto being informed that he had to diversify his diet, something that had attributed to his larger size when compared to his peers. "As sir knows perfectly well, that is not the conversation I was referring to," Yari the weaver bird replied. Lord Hokage was inquiring as to whether sir had shown interest in any of the young ladies who had been to sir's shop. He has been hinting that it may be in the best interest of the village for sir to find a mate. Naruto grumbled. He had to admit that, yes, the Hokage had been hinting that it might be a good idea to increase the size of the Uzumaki clan in Konoha. However, Naruto didn't see anyone who could be a possibility. Of course, walking down the street arguing with a bird doesn't help my prospects. If sir would realize that a kunoichi would be more appreciative of sir's talents, as the civilians do not quite react well, outside of Lady Ayame, of course, Yari replied. Kunoichi will be far more understanding about a summons than a civilian born. They are aware that we are superior beings and not pets. Additionally, sir is a remarkable craftsman, and sir's ability to forge a superior blade is to a kunoichi is no different than my weaving a perfect green nest is to my people. The ladies do not pay attention to anyone else. Look, Yari, he said as he sliced his thumb on a blade. He let the blood swell for a bit before smearing it on the seal on the door to his workshop. He turned the knob and walked in. I'm not sure it would work out with women who are just after my kunai. I believe that is precisely what the Lord Hokage was hoping for, Yari replied. Pervert bird, Naruto muttered as he sent a pulse of chakra into a seal, lighting up the forge and starting the heat. There is nothing perverted about a healthy interest in passing on one's genes, Yari countered before flying off from Naruto's shoulder to a pad of paper. He picked up a brush, dipped it and began to draw. Shall I continue with the explosive tags, sir? Sounds good, Naruto said. Tenten said she wanted some more since she used up the rest of hers on that bandit mission last week and there was some big thing coming up. She'll probably buy out what we've got out already. Better make some more. Very well, sir, Yari replied. And what will sir be working on? I thought I'd finish up the shuriken order, then go practice on my tanto blades, Naruto replied. Kuno-sensei was quite critical when I showed him my last batch and he won't let me go on to longer blades until he's happy with my smaller ones. Indubitably, sir, Yari stated. I shall remember to redirect sir's attention back to those projects when sir gets distracted by sir's other, non-paying experiments. I'll just have a cage bushin work on those, and the storage seal order while I work the forge, Naruto countered, not willing to argue with his old friend and sealing tutor when it came to work. The Weaver Bird summoning contract was not a popular one with ninja. Indeed, the contract hadn't been signed by a ninja since the time of the second Hokage, and then hadn't summoned them after the first few times, much to the consternation of the Weaver Birds. What was the point of a summoning contract if one does not summon? However, from a ninja's point of view this only made sense. The Weaver Birds did not do war. They were not larger than natural size. They did not have the ability to produce oil or heal people with a touch, nor had they venom. Instead, they built things and were masters of sealing techniques, which for a blacksmith they were the greatest of summoned allies. When Naruto turned 7, Hiruzen Sarutobi showed him the contract and allowed him to sign it. It had taken him some time to make it work, but eventually, he managed to summon one of them. Yari was the first and they had been friends since, even if Yari's tone seemed far too formal to other people. However, when compared to some of the higher UPS in the Weaver Bird clan, he was positively vulgar. They had taught Naruto much about sealing, but perhaps the most important lesson was that of hard work. In Weaver Bird Society, you have to build a kick-ass house to get a date. And if you don't attract a lady's attention, you rip your house apart and start all over again. That's dedication. Naruto learned how to apply this ethic to his sealing and blacksmithing. Now when it came to chakra techniques, Naruto was not supposed to know ninjutsu. Indeed, he'd been banned from learning taijutsu, but every once in a while an ex-enbu named Kakashi would sneak Naruto a scroll or two. Jiraiya had given him a lesson or two in ninjutsu, teaching him the early forms of the Rasengan, and had helped his study of the fourth Hokage's sealwork. This was how Naruto learned the Kage Bushin, which had become invaluable in his shop. He couldn't use them in the forge, as even a simple spark or a drop of liquid metal could disperse one. However, they were perfect for mass production of sealing scrolls, explosive tags and other high-demand items. Hours passed as they worked. The workshop echoed as Naruto pounded out a new blade. After years they had grown accustomed to the noises and did not even hear them when they were working on other projects. They did, however, hear the doorbell chime to the shop. Naruto set down the unfinished blade, made a Kage Bushin and went back to work. The Bushin walked out of the workshop and into the store, closing the door behind him. "Tenten," Naruto said with a big smile. "What can I do for you today? Looking to pick up those tags you told me about?" "Sure, and I thought I'd look at your other seals as well," she said with a similar smile. Tenten was just a year older than he was, with dark brown hair tied up in two buns, and a white outfit with a mandarin collar. She had been a ninja for 3 years at that point, but had not made it past the Chunin exam last year, despite her team making it to the finals. Now, having still skipped over Kiri thanks to the ongoing civil war, it was back in Konoha once more. Tenten shifted the bundle she wore on her back and leaned onto the counter. "I'm preparing for the Chunin exam. What have you got?" Naruto snapped his fingers. "Right, I forgot that was coming up," Naruto said. "Reminds me that I'll have to stock up. So here's what I've got for my favorite prospective Chunin." And with that they settled into haggling. By the time Tenten left she had chakra suppressors, explosive tags, barrier seals and a very nasty club that was designed to suddenly increase in weight at the moment of impact while still keeping its inertia. Just as she was about to leave, an unfortunately familiar face walked in. "HN," was the statement that passed the Uchiha's lips. It could have been a greeting or it could have been him telling Naruto to go fuck himself. Naruto didn't really care about Sasuke's opinion, so he didn't give it much thought. "What do you want?" Naruto asked bluntly. The elated, last Uchiha nodded his head in several directions, vaguely pointing at store models mounted on the back wall. "I don't speak douchebag. Use words." Naruto could see a glimmer of rage in the other boy's eyes, which only made the blonde snort with derision. "If you can't tell me, using the linguistic skills most of us learn as children, then get the hell out of my store. There are paying customers waiting." Sometimes it paid to have driven almost all of the competition out of business, and being able to tell off assholes was one hell of a payment. "Fine," Sasuke growled. 10 packs of kunai, 5 packs of shuriken, 2 rolls of ninja wire, and 5 exploding tags, medium strength. "Ah, now was that so hard?" Naruto asked as if he were speaking to a 4-year-old as he rang up the order. A moment later the order slid through a slot in the back wall. He walked over, picked it up and set it on the counter. He finished writing the slip and turned it around to face his surly customer. Predictably, the Uchiha's eyes bulged when he saw the price. "What is this?" he demanded. "That would be the total amount that you pay me for my goods and services," Naruto replied. He kept his face flat as Sasuke's mouth curled up into a grimace, but inside Naruto was laughing. "Normally this is the point where you give me money." The Uchiha grumbled something wordlessly, but handed over the ryo as the door chimed, signaling another customer. "Thank you for your business, do come again," Naruto said cheerfully. "Don't let the door hit you on the way out. It's worth more than you are." Sasuke Uchiha stormed out and quite deliberately slammed the door behind him, leaving the pink-haired girl gaping after him. Naruto noted that her forehead protector was brand spanking new, with that just polished gleam that most of them had for a few months after the ninjas put them on. She was also wearing it wrong, and she had a pretty big forehead. "Sasuke-kun?" she asked, not used to seeing that side of her crush. "Hello there, welcome to my shop," Naruto said in a friendly tone. I haven't seen you here before. What can I get for you? Sakura Haruno. I need the same as him plus Senbon and 12 exploding tags, Sakura said, nodding to where Sasuke left. She was clearly still confused by Sasuke's reaction. She was still pondering the odd behavior when she noticed the box in front of her. Her eyes flew open when she saw the price. What? This isn't half of what you charged, Sasuke-kun. I know you're a new ninja, but what you just saw was a good old-fashioned asshole tax, Naruto explained. A what tax? Sakura asked. An asshole tax, Naruto replied. If you're polite and pay your bills on time, people tend to like you. If you're a complete douchebag to everyone around you, people like you less, at least in general. There are exceptions, but why treat the assholes the same as the polite, nice customers? Being a douche to the shopkeeper? Well, that's another 10% right there. Act like you're the center of the universe? I'd say that's worth 5% added on. In the end, I actually do get paid to deal with assholes. But Sasuke-kun isn't an asshole. She protested, absolutely shocked that someone would declare such a thing. He's the best in the class. Rookie of the year 2 years in a row, didn't make it the first year, so figured he'd go for another try and happened to get a lazy bastard who just let him fly by, Naruto explained. He noticed the girl was looking down at the ground in shame. Ah, so you were on his team last year, am I right? She reluctantly nodded. But not this year? She shook her head. Don't let it get you down, Naruto said. It happens year after year. Big fish, little pond. Then they don't realize that there's a bigger fish in the ocean, and they just got swept out to sea. Were you in the academy? She asked, trying to change the subject a bit. Nope, Naruto said. Wanted to, but I got hurt as a kid and I was banned from trying. Your parents? Naruto shook his head. I'm an orphan, he replied, making the girl go pale. I'm sorry, Naruto waved her off. I never even knew them, Naruto said. They died the day I was born. Oh. She paused and looked up at him as if she was trying to figure out the question. My birthday is October 10th. October 10th, oh, she said as she realized what he meant. The girl looked up at him with surprise. You're my age. I know, I look older, he said. I get it all the time. Oh, so she said before grabbing the slip. All the while inner Sakura was telling her to jump over the counter and screw him for all he was worth. I should pay this. That does help out when you run a business, Naruto said warmly. He gave her the change and grinned fox-like. Come back anytime. Thanks, she said a bit shyly. I will. As soon as the door closed, Naruto looked at the ceiling. You can come out now, Kakashi. Kakashi dropped to the floor with his visible eye curled up in a smile. He snapped his book shut and leaned against the counter. Flirting with the new genin? I didn't know you had it in you, Kakashi chided playfully. Naruto snorted. If that's what you call flirting, no wonder you're single, Naruto said. He bit his thumb and spread a bit of blood on a seal under the counter. The air seemed to fizz for a moment before shimmering slightly and falling to the floor. Come on in. I still can't believe people don't notice the barrier, Kakashi commented as he jumped over the counter. The moment he was in, Naruto reactivated the barrier. I'm good, Kakashi, Naruto said. I might not know what the greatest fire country export is, but I know seals. I'm very good at what I do. Kakashi glanced around the storefront. What? Naruto asked. You tinted the windows slightly so they wouldn't notice the color of the barrier, Kakashi explained before grinning through his mask. I'm good, too. Naruto just rolled his eyes and opened the back door for him to pass through. You know, I barely noticed when you swapped with your clone, Kakashi commented in a happy tone. You're getting better. Almost seamless. I doubt anyone less than high C rank would notice. Possibly even low B rank. A ninjutsu user who isn't a ninja, that's me, Naruto grumbled not for the first time. He made another cage bushin and had it man the front. As they walked into the workshop, there were 20 Narutos working on various projects, from hammering rivets to sweeping the floor to writing seals. Master Kakashi, how wonderful of you to join us on this spectacular day which we are forced to spend inside, Yari said as he fluttered over. I see Naruto is complaining about not being allowed to be a ninja as he interacts with rookies his own age again. Yup, hit the nail on the head again, Yari, Kakashi said. Even if Naruto knows why he isn't allowed to fight and why all ninjutsu I've taught him is how to get away in case of danger. Stop talking about me like I'm not here, Naruto groused. He really needs to stop being so upset about not having the chance to get killed for money, Kakashi commented. It's not really a fun time. I'd much rather stay home and read my books than have someone trying to kill me. Oi, always a wise course of action, sir, Yari said. He turned to Naruto. As I can hear the old lady with the seeds and it is getting towards dusk, I shall take my leave for the night, sir. Have fun, Yari, Naruto said. Eat a few bugs for me. They are most delectable this time of year, the weaver bird mused as he fluttered off. Do remember that sir requires sleep to function. They watched the bird leave as they made their way to the back of the workshop. Kakashi picked up the heavy table and set it aside. Naruto activated another seal and the floor turned into a series of steps. They walked down to another workshop. This is it, Naruto said, motioning to a vaguely humanoid shape. Konoha's answer to chakra armor. He pulled the sheet away to reveal a set of armor that gleamed red and gold in the low light of the workshop. So you finally reverse-engineered the Snow Country armor? Kakashi asked. Nope, Naruto admitted. This is all new except for the idea. What? Kakashi asked in surprise. Snow Country uses techniques that I can't replicate, different alloys that I haven't discovered how to make, Naruto explained as he held up the example Kakashi gave him last year after the Jonin and Team Guy came back from snow, which was now the land of spring. They don't rely on seals. It's all something about the armor itself and I'm not a metallurgy expert. I know the basics when it comes to steel and other alloys I use, but this is beyond me. So you came up with this instead, Kakashi said, nodding to the pile of parts vaguely set out in a human form. He picked up the helmet and got a shock. Gah, what was that? Security feature, Naruto said as he pulled a small, glowing, triangular prism from inside his shirt. It's attuned to me, so right now it won't work for anyone else. Kakashi bent down to look into the helmet. He couldn't see the seals, but that didn't mean they weren't there. No eye holes? You fly blind with this on? Nope, Naruto said proudly. I reverse-engineered the seals on the old man's crystal ball. You put the helmet on and if it's attuned to you, the helmet inside vanishes and is replaced by a view of the outside. How so? This, Naruto held up the prism, is a chakra battery. It absorbs my chakra, hey. He yelled as Kakashi knocked it out of his hand. You shouldn't be messing with that. Kakashi commanded sternly as if talking to an unruly little brother who'd just been juggling a pinless grenade. You know what could happen if you get chakra exhaustion, which is why I designed it to never take more than my body can easily replenish. Naruto snapped back as he bent down to pick it back up. He grumbled as he dusted it off, checking the seals carved ever so carefully into the crystal's surface. He looked up at Kakashi and sighed. It's attuned to me, so it won't work for anyone who doesn't have very similar chakra. For other people I'd need to make them their own battery. So no one can use it but the owner, Kakashi said, not apologizing for his earlier actions. Ingenious. Of course it is, I made it. Naruto said with a wide smile that made him look a bit too much like a fox. He held up a gauntlet. Fully articulated, capable of full range of motion, even hand seals. Even at Jonin speed? I can't do Jonin speed, Naruto replied flatly. Wait, so you're the only one who has used this? Well yeah, Naruto said. No one else has my kind of chakra and I'm not exactly advertising the fact that I built it. If it's yours I would have expected it to be orange, Kakashi said jokingly. Hey, red and gold make orange. Naruto reminded him, but right now I don't think anyone with chakra reserves less than Jonin average could power it. So it's a chakra hog? Kakashi asked. Well, the prism powers the armor, but the person powers the prism, Naruto said after a moment of trying to think up a way to explain the theory. That's very oversimplified, but it's the basic idea. But it drains chakra? Not when they're wearing it, Naruto said. And it's the prism that drains the chakra and stores it up as a battery, not the armor itself. But you can charge the prism intentionally if you want to. How did you even think to come up with that? Kakashi asked as he leaned down to look at the articulated gauntlet. It's not that hard, Naruto protested. There are plenty of techniques that drain chakra for later use. And then there was that fire sealing technique that pervy sage taught me. Fire is energy, chakra is energy. All I had to do was convert the seal from one energy type to another. Kinda like when you convert regular chakra into elemental natured chakra, except sorta, kinda backwards. I wouldn't even know where to start about how to do that. Kakashi admitted as he reached out and patted Naruto on the head. Well, I don't need to learn how to kill stuff, so I've got time for other things, Naruto said cheekily. Don't get cocky, kid, Kakashi replied. And tell someone when you're experimenting on weird new seals. They can blow up in your face. That hasn't happened in years. Naruto protested. But it has happened, Kakashi said sternly. Well, it was a long time ago, Naruto protested, as only the young think 2 years ago is a long time. And I use Kage Bushin for writing them for that very reason. Well, at least you're being smart about it, Kakashi said. But you still need to tell people. Either me, Shikaku or the Hokage. If nothing else, ask Yari to take a message. Fine, Naruto said, crossing his arms. His pout only made him look much younger. He tried to stay angry, but it wasn't easy when someone was right and you knew it, so Naruto changed the subject. So why'd you fail the douchebag in Sakura's team? Uchiha was a douchebag who thought his teammates were trash, and Sakura and the other girl, I think her name was Amy, kept fighting over Sasuke even though Guy could tell he wasn't interested, and I doubt there's anyone more oblivious than Guy, Kakashi replied. I heard they were put on other teams this time. Sakura got slipped into Osamu's to fill in that Nara kid's spot, and Uchiha got some Jonin who decided to give in to the pressure and pass him. The other one was on some totally new team. Why do you always fail them? Naruto asked as he slipped a hand into a gauntlet and flexed his hand and started doing one-handed seals for practice. Because they needed it, Kakashi said. They were kids who had always been told they were amazing and that they were ninjas now, but they had no clue what they were getting into. By utterly crushing them, I forced them to make a choice about their future. Those who have gone back to the academy have become talented ninja. Those who quit being a ninja altogether will have full lives doing other things. I bet they're glad the fourth made that reintegration program, Naruto said. Some of them probably don't realize how new it was, Kakashi said. Before then, flunk outs couldn't really function in either side. The program lets them become civilians again and not start at the bottom of the barrel. If I was a ninja, would you have failed me? Naruto asked. Yes, Kakashi replied. If I thought you needed it. Sounds good to me, Naruto said as he slid on the other gauntlet. Wiggling his fingers, he shot Kakashi a grin and was replaced by a log a moment later. So they do have pretty decent dexterity, Kakashi said, turning around as Naruto fanned his fingers in front of the Jonin's face so he could get a good look at the detail. What does the circle on the palm do? Nothing yet, but I'm hoping to add something more there, so I left a circle for a clean ceiling space, Naruto replied. Fair enough, I guess, the Jonin replied. Well, I'll go report to the Hokage. He wanted me to check in on your progress, so I'll tell him you couldn't do anything with the chakra armor. Oi, Naruto belted out in an annoyed tone. Kakashi grinned once more. Then I'll tell him you made something new and interesting, the Jonin finished. Be sure to tell him you showed up 3 hours late, Naruto taunted. It wasn't my fault, Kakashi said over his shoulder as he walked up the stairs. There was a black cat, so I had to turn around. Finally, it was the day Konoha had been waiting for. The Chunin exam's third round would be taking place once more, and people from all over the elemental nations were arriving. There were street vendors, ticket sellers, buskers, and scalpers, all looking for the attention of shinobi, civilians and nobles alike. All this, and Naruto didn't even notice it. He didn't notice when the fights began, even though he promised Tenten to be there. He didn't notice when there was the intermission, even though he told Ayame he'd be there to eat some of her special ramen. He didn't notice the screams of fear as Sand and Sound attacked. He didn't notice anything until a big evil snake broke down his barrier seal and started trashing his workshop. Naruto gaped as it flicked its tongue out here and there as it sought out its prey that was not protected by Anbu like he normally was. Well shit, Naruto said eloquently. The snake posed to strike and Naruto dove out of the way. It slithered and slinked around the various tables of the workshop as it sought to cut off Naruto's escape vectors. It did not expect Naruto to go further into the building and duck behind a table. There was the sound of something grinding, so the snake started over towards him, only to find bare stone. Now, Naruto-kun, a taunting voice said. You can't hide forever. Naruto, hiding in his hidden lab, felt he most certainly could. Yari, are you okay? He asked his feathered friend. Tip-top, sir, the weaver bird summon replied. Perhaps if one considers that we are trapped and they already broke one barrier seal, That hiding in a hole in the ground with no exits was perhaps not the wisest of decisions. I have a plan, Naruto said. Oh dear, Yari replied worriedly. The bird cocked his head up at the stone ceiling which was now starting to crack. I do hope sir's plan includes speed, as it appears we have little time to dally. I'm almost there, Naruto said as he painted a little on the palm of his gauntlet. Do assure me that you are not attempting to reconfigure the repulsors, the bird said, looking worriedly at the gauntlet. We know where you are, Naruto-kun, and it's only a matter of time, the man sing-songed from the other side of the stone hatch. The pounding resumed as the attack resumed. Stone cracked some more. Just a little more time, Naruto said. Time, while given freely by others, sir can never give to oneself, the bird replied. There, Naruto said, holding up his palm. Might I remind sir that the futon beams have never functioned properly? The bird inquired. They'll work. Forgive me if I doubt, the bird continued, but the last time we attempted what you were attempting, the gauntlet flew backwards and created a significant hole in the laboratory. They'll work. He powered on the gauntlet, which promptly faded out. Yari, if this doesn't work, reverse summon me, Naruto said as he held his gauntleted hand up, fingers spread wide. He flexed the fingers twice before rolling his wrist around to make sure it was working. He turned to face his oldest friend with a sad smile before nodding. As you wish, sir, Yari replied before flying to the far corner of the room. Might I suggest at least wearing the helmet? Good idea, Naruto said, scrambling to the table where his project was waiting. He put on the helmet, but turned around as the stone hatch started to crack again. His breath caught, but the barrier seal flared and held. He turned back to his creation. Screw it, I'm putting it all on. It took Kabuto and the snake summon nearly 5 minutes to break through the stone hatch and deactivate the barrier seal. Unfortunately, they did not find a poor defenseless civilian blacksmith like they expected. Instead, they found a person covered from head to toe in red and gold armor, with one palm facing the invaders. Eat this, Naruto's voice said through the speakers. There was a great burst of light and the next thing Kabuto knew, the snake summon had no head and Naruto was flying backwards into the wall. Inside the armor, Naruto sat up and shook his head. Physics. Right, let's do this. In hindsight, perhaps wearing the full armor was a good idea, Yari said through his tiny headset as he flew out of the danger zone. Just as he was about to leave, he dropped a seed with a minute explosive seal inscribed on one side. He made it out just as Kabuto's back exploded in fire. Should we need to meet up, I'll just go looking for scenes of mass destruction as usual. Right, though I should probably be offended by that, Naruto said as he stood back up. He held up a hand and this time anchored himself to the ground with chakra. The beam of raw power sent the confused Kabuto back up out of the workshop, through the kunai display, and out a window. Perhaps it's time to play dead, the heavily wounded traitor thought to himself, letting himself bleed a bit. He didn't expect the blacksmith to walk up in the perfectly articulated armor. He barely had time to replace himself with a prepared corpse before the thing's hand cannon activated and blew the decoy into smithereens. Yari, what can you see up there? Naruto asked as he glanced around at his surroundings. Konoha appears to be under attack, the bird replied through the radio. Might I suggest evacuating to the civilian shelters? Not this time, Naruto said. He willfully sent a heavy charge into the chakra battery, as much as he could without being winded. If the futon beams push me backwards, then. He locked his legs and arms together and activated all 4 futon beams at the same time. There was a brief moment of hesitation before he took off into the sky and screamed for joy. I can fly. Very good, sir. Now might I suggest relocating to a safer location? Perhaps the inside of an erupting volcano? Yari commented as he got the hell out of Dodge. And if I might be so bold, Lord Hokage appears to be battling 2 of the 3 previous Hokages inside a barrier. Naruto angled his hands to bring him around and got a better look. Sure enough, there was a purple box on a roof near the stadium. How can you tell they're the other Hokages? Naruto asked. One is using wood and the other is using water, Yari replied. Fair enough, Naruto replied as he slowed the chakra use and lowered himself down near the waiting Anbu. He flipped up his face mask. Hey, Naruto, what are you doing here? One in the bear mask demanded. And what are you wearing? It's armor, Naruto said. Just curious, but is anyone in that building? He pointed to the building beneath the Hokage fight. No, all were evacuated, just like you're supposed to be, Bear replied. What the hell are you doing out here? Some guy with a snake busted up my shop and tried to kidnap me, Naruto explained. Out here, it's harder for them to reach me. He glanced back up to the battle above their heads. Can you tell him to brace for impact? Why? Because I'm going to break the barrier for you, Naruto replied. Pick me up and I'll do it, Bear said. I sure hope this works, Naruto said as he grabbed Bear from behind and activated his boot repulsor arrays. What? Bear demanded in surprise and worry. Good, it worked, Naruto said as he realized the 2 arrays in his feet were enough for flight even with a passenger. Bear signaled the Hokage, who wrapped himself in a cage of adamantine bars. Naruto glanced at Bear. You going to be okay if I drop you off? I'm Anbu, he replied. Good point, Naruto said, dropping Bear on a group of sound ninjas. Naruto spun around, powered up both his hand beams, and blew the building under the Hokage, previous Hokages and Orochimaru into itty-bitty pieces. The 4 minions of Orochimaru shook as their previous stable seat was abruptly missing. With one bit of concentration broken, the whole barrier came down. Naruto flashed the grateful Hokage a quick salute and took off towards the gigantic 3-headed snake that just broke into Konoha proper. He flew right close to one head, held out his hand, and gave it a repulsor blast right in the eye from point-blank range. With the other 2 heads suddenly focused entirely on him, Naruto spun around in the air and launched 2 tiny kunai. They didn't do much damage when used as throwing weapons, but did when the very overcharged explosive seals activated. Naruto turned and started to walk back towards the stadium as the 2 heads exploded in a maelstrom of fire and gore. He soon found himself surrounded by sound and sand ninjas. Yari? Naruto said aloud, much to the confusion of the ninjas about to attack. Yes, sir? Remind me to get you some of those special seeds you like so much, Naruto finished as his forearm opened a compartment and little ball bearings dribbled out like silver rain. They split up and rolled to the attacking ninjas only to transform into lightning. Your tiny seals worked perfectly. Of course they did, sir, Yari replied. I drew them. All but one of the ninjas fell to the ground unconscious. The remaining one brought up his ninja to attack, but was promptly sliced in the back by the newly arrived Kakashi. Naruto, why are you walking around the battlefield? You, who are an invaluable asset to the village and cannot be replaced, Kakashi growled out as he pulled his kunai out of the dead ninja's back. I didn't know there was a battle going on until a snake and a traitor attacked my shop, Naruto replied. He was there for me specifically. Who? Silver hair, glasses, stupid smirk, Naruto replied. Used to buy a lot of senbon. I think I caught him in that peanut butter and beer trap last year. I'll take note of it. Now get to a safe location and take your armor with you, Kakashi instructed. Naruto's response was interrupted by the crumbling of Konoha's outer walls. Or I could help with air support against the giant tanuki made of sand attacking Konoha's outer walls, Naruto suggested. That's a tailed beast, Kakashi said. So, I'm thinking. No. But Kakashi, I'm safe in the armor and I can help, Naruto protested. Mother wants your blood. The tanuki bellowed as it scooped up a sound ninja and turned it to paste. Naruto winced and felt a gagging sensation. Also, it's attacking anything that moves, so I would be involved anyway. Fine, but only as a distraction, Kakashi said as he charged forward. It was quickly apparent that the tanuki was not very particular about target as at least half of the people he attacked were from sand and a quarter from sound. Konoha casualties were remarkably low thus far, which was a good thing. Naruto shot straight up as a massive hand of sand smashed the ground where he and Kakashi had been a moment before, utterly destroying the stunned ninja. Hey, ugly, Naruto said before shooting an explosive kunai at the thing's face. It slid deeply into the sand body and promptly exploded. Yes, then the body reformed and reclaimed the sand. No, said Naruto. He brought both hands up and hit the thing with everything he had. The chakra supplying the power to the armor's seals flickered, making the display inside the helmet fade in and out. Naruto charged up the battery again and the power was back on. He couldn't do that much more and still be okay. Naruto, Kakashi, a gigantic toad commanded. Both of you, out of here. Jiraiya, riding on Gamabunta's head, charged forward to take care of the tailed beast. Naruto swept down, grabbed Kakashi by the arms and flew back towards the center of town. "How come you argue with me but you won't argue with Jiraiya?" Kakashi asked. "You don't argue with pervy sage. You protest and then get manipulated or forced into doing what he wants," Naruto argued as they sailed towards the front lines. "He's also still better than me at combat ceiling." He glanced to the side. "Mind if I drop you by the Hokage?" "Why?" "Because the old man looks like he needs help," Naruto said a moment before he dropped Kakashi. To his credit, Kakashi landed in a crouch, right in front of the Hokage, surprising the hell out of Orochimaru. And then Naruto ran out of power again. The image of the outside vanished, replaced by the metal and padding of the helmet as the armor suddenly felt much heavier. "Crap," Naruto said as he started falling from the sky. As Kakashi's looking underneath would have it, Naruto was directly over an apartment building near the merchant quarter. He crashed through the roof. He crashed through the second floor. He crashed through the first floor. It was a credit to his engineering that he didn't get hurt as he fell through to the basement, which happened to be a civilian safety bunker. He fell right on a sound nin that had found his way in, squashing the invader flat. Naruto tried to sit up, but could not. He flipped open the face mask and looked down, only then realizing that Kakashi had stolen the prism battery. Note to self. Reworked chest plate so prism battery can't be removed from outside, he said out loud. Because that would be a serious design flaw. "Naruto?" two young women asked. He looked up to see Ayame and Tenten standing over him. Tenten had her very nasty club prepped for smashing, having been fighting the ninja Naruto just landed on, and Ayame had been shielding a child. "Ayame, Tenten," Naruto said with a wide smile. "Mind if I drop in?" Naruto panicked when he was pushed into the ravine. He tried to stick to the walls, but his motion wasn't helping and he couldn't quite get the right mix of chakra as he panicked. As a response, he pulled on all the chakra he could, which also included his alternate source. A moment later he found himself standing perfectly stable in a hallway. Passages split off in either direction and metal pipes ran overhead. The floor was solid beneath him, but had been flooded, with water up to his knees. "What the hell?" Naruto asked. His legs splashed through the knee-high water as he walked around, exploring his surroundings. There was just enough light to see in the hallway, but the side passages and rooms quickly faded to darkness. He trudged forward, step by step, walking forward until he heard a vile howl issue forth from a side room. There was a wave of something with just the briefest touch of something familiar. "That chakra," he thought as he turned around, quickly stepping into the room it emanated from. Not far inside were ornate bars of gold and ebony, standing taller than the Hokage monument. "What is this place?" he asked aloud, only a moment before a massive claw reached out to grab at him. It missed, but only barely. "Curse this seal," a voice said from the depths of the cage. "I so want to eat you, but it prevents me." "What are you here for?" it demanded harshly. "What is this place?" Naruto asked. He looked upwards and saw a tiny tag, attached high above his head, that pinned the doors of the cage together. From what he could tell it looked exactly like the seal on his stomach. "Where do you think this is, little snack?" the voice asked with a bemused rumble. Naruto was about to respond, but turned around at a sharp sound coming from farther down the hallway he started in. There was a crash and a rumble as something heavy fell. Naruto rushed out to see the source and arrived just in time to see the hallway bloom with light. "Foolish morsel," the voice from the cage snarled. "Do not ignore me." But at this point Naruto was more interested in what was at the other end. It wasn't long before his eyes adjusted to the new level of light and he could see something creeping in. They were people. "Look, this place hasn't been prospected yet," one said. A man, sounded like he wasn't that much younger than the Hokage, and looked older and more weathered, if that was possible. When he ducked his head and flashed a light around it landed on Naruto and paused. "What the fuck? What is it, Merle?" "There's a kid in here," Merle said. "How'd a kid get in there?" "The place is locked up tight since the Great War," Merle's younger, female friend demanded. "Kid, how'd you get in here?" Merle demanded. "I fell and woke up here," Naruto said honestly. "Well, I was pushed, actually." "Where are you from, kid?" Merle asked as he stepped inside and his female partner climbed down into the hole. "Konoha," Naruto said proudly. "Never heard of it," the prospector said. "Julie, you ever heard of Konoha?" "Nope," she said, wiping a bit of dirt off her face. Sure you're just not a lost member of the scav teams of Little Lamplighter? What's a scav? Naruto asked. Well, that answers that question, Julie replied with a smirk. What's down here, kid? Something in a cage with claws that says it wants to eat me, Naruto replied. Well, shit, Merle grumbled. Do y'all think the muties had found this place? Muties? Naruto asked with confusion. Big, yellow-green, no hair, like to shoot people? Nope, this has orange fur, Naruto said. Merle, you ever heard of a critter like that traipsing the capital wasteland? Julie asked. Nope, Merle replied. There were a series of sharp noises from the hole the two crawled in that instantly had the duo on edge. They pulled some strange objects from their pockets and held them out towards the hole. Naruto leaned forward to get a better look, only to see an oval-shaped thing bounce down the rubble into the water. Shit, grenade, Julie said, throwing herself on Naruto and rolling him into a room. Merle was not so fast, no doubt to his advanced age. The blast that filled the hallway pushed the air outward, making Naruto feel like he'd just been punched all over his body. Goddamn fucking raiders, Merle bellowed as he clutched his shredded calf. Julie shook her head to shake some of the ringing out of her ears before grabbing Merle and dragging him into the shadows with them. Oh baby, you were so right that it was best to wait, one simpering voice said as shadows appeared at the entrance. Two more of the grenades bounced down the rubble. Julie pulled Merle behind a pillar and bent over Naruto, covering his ears at the expense of her own. The two people strode down the rubble once the grenades went off and the girl giggled as the man fired his machine gun down the corridor. Come out wherever you are. The guy taunted. If you don't come out now I'll track you down and fuck you in your eyeballs. The girl giggled like he had just made a very witty statement about someone's style of dress. Julie kept her hand over Naruto's mouth, but couldn't hide the pained wheeze Merle let out. It echoed through the flooded ruins, which served to hide their location, but it still let the raiders know there was someone there. Hidden in the shadows, the trio watched as the two raiders stalked down the hallway, the water sloshing at their feet as they made their way. The guy had a partially shaved head, like someone had shaved half of it, then got drunk and half-assed the other side of his head. He wore no shirt and modesty, if he had ever possessed any, was served by a pair of leather pants that had seen better days many days, probably years, before. The girl had a hot pink mohawk, wore boots and not much else besides a belt full of grenades and revolver in a holster. Fuck them baby, she said as she took a grenade and threw it in a nearby room. They'd better have some fucking psycho in here, the man snarled a moment before the grenade went off. I know baby, I know, the girl said. They continued on, as Julie, Naruto and the bleeding Merle kept as quiet as could be, hidden in the dark shadows of the ruins. The trio watched the raiders stroll on by, Julie and Merle both wishing they were too drugged out to make a regular search. When they were farther down the way, Julie let out the breath she was holding. As quietly as she could, she rifled through her backpack to find a strange needle thing that she stabbed into Merle's wounded leg. What? Naruto asked as he watched the damaged leg repair itself. It was not a painless process, as the hiss Merle let out suggested. Luckily they weren't near the ocean or that frag grenade would have been a real bitch to deal with. Shush, Julie commanded worriedly as she and Merle quietly stood up. Don't say anything or they'll come back and kill us. They started back towards the entrance, Merle still badly wounded even if he wasn't bleeding out anymore. Shit on a stick, gasped the raider. That cage is fucking gold. Better than Caps, baby, the woman sycophanted. What's the paper for? Oh shit, Naruto said aloud as he realized where they were. He turned around and yelled. No, aha, the man said, jumping into the hallway and opening fire. Merle threw himself in front of his partner and a boy he'd barely met. The bullets were more than anything a stimpack could repair and he fell to the ground, staining the floodwaters red with his life's blood. Merle, Julie screamed in horror. She looked up as the raider reloaded. It's spray and play time, he taunted as he brought up his gun, but Julie was faster and shot the gun out of his hand. She went down on one knee and pressed a hand to her shoulder where the raider had shot her. Julie's expression was full of hate. I got no, baby, the woman raider said from the fox's room as if there wasn't a firefight going on in the hallway. I got know what this thing does. There was the sound of paper tearing. Naruto looked horrified as he screamed a wordless protest. Rip it off, suggested a dark voice from within the bars. It was haunting, inviting, suggestive. Go ahead. You want to know what I am. You won't have a clue until you do it. I got no, baby, she said, stepping up on the tips of her toes to reach the paper. I gotta know what this does. The raider was halfway through ripping the paper off the wall when a hand reached out and caught hers. I think you should leave that alone, don't you? A blond man stated flatly. She looked up, but didn't release the seal until his previously light grip shifted, snapping her wrist and forcing her, one finger at a time, to release the paper. He brushed it with a hand, and the next moment it was complete. No, the dark voice from within bellowed and snarled in almost berserk rage. A claw reached out to snatch at the blond man, but it couldn't reach, the claws just barely missing the man. That was my favorite fucking gun you just shot, you bitch. The male raider snarled in the hallway. I'm gonna rip off your head and fuck your spine. Ah, the blond man said. That sounds like my cue. The man vanished in a swirl of leaves a half-second later. Naruto did not freeze up once he realized what was going on. When the raider pulled out a knife, Naruto felt a calm come over him. He reacted as he was trained. He too pulled out a blade before pulling an arm back and chucking the kunai straight and true. It flew right into the man's upper arm, prompting him to drop that weapon as well. The raider was so chemmed up that he didn't even realize what was going on around him, so it was a complete surprise when a hand grabbed him by the neck and held his face just barely above the water. Now, a tall blond man said, "You aren't supposed to be here. Care to explain?" Naruto looked up and saw his hero holding up the bad guy with one arm. The fourth? Naruto asked in a half-whisper. The man looked down at Naruto's gaping form and smiled. It's good to see you again, Naruto, the fourth Hokage said as he tossed the raider into a wall, knocking him out. You wouldn't happen to know what happened here, would you? Nice conversation, but do you think you could help me not die? Julie asked, holding a hand to her torso. By now her shirt was covered in blood and was dripping into floodwaters. Sorry, the fourth said, appearing right in front of her. I don't know much more than basic techniques, but I'll do what I can. His hands started to glow with green chakra and soon the wound was closed. Julie, however, was looking at him like he'd just turned the sky purple and made the capital wasteland sprout daisies that wouldn't mutate and try to eat people. What the hell was that? She asked. The blond man blinked at her. Healing chakra, he said as if it were obvious. She stared up at him with a complete lack of comprehension and blinked several times as she processed the statement. What the hell are you people? In the real world, Naruto had been out for several tiny moments when Jiraiya realized he wasn't waking up and was still careening down the side of the ravine. In a feat of agility one would not expect for a man his age, he managed to catch the falling boy before he could suffer anything but minor wounds like broken limbs. With Naruto thankfully deprived of a gaping, crushing head wound, Jiraiya took the boy to the Hokage's office, as it was quickly apparent Naruto wasn't waking up. The third Hokage pinched his forehead in an attempt to repel the impending headache. What exactly possessed you to throw the boy with the most powerful demon sealed within him down a ravine? Sarutobi asked his student. I've been trying to get him to use the fox's chakra for almost 3 weeks now, Jiraiya said. Emotional trauma worked once before according to what he said and what was in his file, so I figured I would try something similar. So you threw him off a cliff, Sarutobi finished for him, clearly not amused. So I threw him off a cliff, Jiraiya admitted. The third Hokage took an irritated drag off his pipe and motioned to his anbo. Get me Inoichi, he said simply. They vanished and very shortly the head of the Yamanaka clan appeared in the office. Hokage-sama, he said, giving a little bow. So prompt and polite, Sarutobi said. I should have you teach a seminar to my students in Jonin. But that's for later. Right now we have a bigger problem. They quickly filled him in. And so we would like you to see where Naruto's mind has gone to. I've never done this on a demon container before, Inoichi warned. We know, Jiraiya replied. Which is why I'll be watching the seal to see if anything happens. Very well, Inoichi agreed reluctantly. He set his fingers on the boy's forehead and concentrated for a moment until his eyes flew open. Oh shit. And with that inauspicious beginning, Inoichi's consciousness was pulled fully into Naruto's mindscape. Naruto, Julie and the fourth Hokage looked up at the sudden splash as Inoichi displayed none of the grace ninja were known for and fell face first into the Shinhai irradiated water. Inoichi? Minato Namikaze said in surprise as he held one hand to his groin. What are you doing here? Inoichi pushed himself up with both arms and looked up at the familiar voice. Tall, blonde and limping was the fourth Hokage looking down at him. "What the hell?" he said, with his jaw nearly dragging through the rads splashing around at his feet. "That's what I want to know." Julie protested. "Hey, Ino's dad," Naruto said warmly. "Did you know the fourth's my dad?" Inoichi looked between father and son in confusion. He slowly climbed to his feet. Yes, I suppose I did," Inoichi admitted. Hokage-sama, why are you limping?" "I'm too short to punch him in the face, so I went for what I could reach," Naruto answered. "Why'd you punch your father?" Julie asked. "Because he put the stupid fox into me," Naruto said as if it was completely obvious. It was clearly not obvious to Julie, who was debating whether the pre-war goodies trapped in the building might not be worth the trouble of these crazy blonde men after all. "I will admit that I deserved that," Minato agreed. Inoichi, his composure regained, crossed his arms over his chest and gave the other man a closer inspection. It was like the fourth hadn't aged a day since the last time Inoichi had seen him. "How do I know it's really you?" Inoichi asked. The fourth paused slightly before limping over and whispering something in the other man's ear. Inoichi's eyes went wide in shock and his face a shade or two paler. "Well, while that doesn't fully prove your identity, it does lean heavily in your favor. At least Naruto wouldn't know about that." "Well, I should hope so," Minato said with a small grin. "How are you even here at all?" Inoichi blurted out. "I put some of my chakra in the seal in case it was ever removed, so I could sealing back up again," Minato explained. "I appeared when someone tried to mess things up for my son." He nodded to where the raider woman was trussed up with makeshift bindings made out of clothes and a small bit of twine. There was a man's dead body bobbing in the water next to her. "How is this even possible?" Inoichi said, turning to Naruto. "We're in your mind?" Naruto just gave an innocent shrug, but didn't even pretend to understand what was going on. Is the seal safe?" Inoichi asked, glancing nervously at the strangely dressed woman and not sure how much he should say. "Safer actually," Minato replied. "I had time to do more than just a rush job." "Oh, good," Inoichi half-whispered as he contemplated the fact that the seal that had been protecting Konoha and probably most of Fire Country from destruction was nothing but a rush job of a seal. "That's very good." He looked between father and son for a long moment as he searched for words. "Sue," he said slowly. "I should probably report this to the third. Before you go, maybe you could pass a few messages along for me?" Minato said with a slightly dark grin. A short while later Inoichi sat up with wide eyes as Jiraiya and the third Hokage stood over him. "Oh shit, what is the fox escaping? Trying to take him over?" the Hokage asked. "Oh, no. It's much worse than that," Inoichi replied. "What could be worse than that?" Jiraiya asked. "I just walked in on Naruto telling his father about his life," Inoichi replied. "Minato is, well, not pleased with you too." "What?" the two older men demanded. "The fourth Hokage put his chakra in Naruto's seal and apparently it is not fading like Minato thought it would," Inoichi explained. "The fourth's chakra was not supposed to activate unless something disturbed the seal. Something did and it wasn't Naruto." The look on the two men's faces was of shock, fear and worry. Apparently there are other people in Naruto's mindscape. They tried to pull off the tag. "How?" the Hokage asked. "I don't know. Is it possible to bring him out into our world?" Jiraiya asked. "I suppose it's possible, but I wouldn't even know where to start," the blonde man admitted. "Also, that's not what we should be worried about at all." "Why is that?" "Because Naruto appears to have a lot more than just a simple mindscape," Inoichi explained. "It's disturbingly complex and the fact that it appears to be a ruined city doesn't make me happy at all." "But the fox is trapped, right?" the Hokage asked. "Yes, Minato showed me the seal himself," Inoichi replied, accepting a glass of water from Jiraiya. He seemed very confident that it was stronger than the first one. Jiraiya raised an eyebrow at that and Inoichi chuckled. He said that it wasn't a rush job this time. "And Minato's rush jobs are better than most people's finished masterpieces," Sarutobi smiled. "But how can we be sure that it's really him?" "Well, he told me something Naruto couldn't possibly know," Inoichi replied. "And while the details remain vague as this cannot possibly get back to my wife, but it involves a keg of sake, a bachelor's party and a vat of whipped cream as wide across as I am tall." "And you're convinced this was not something the fox would know?" the Hokage asked. Unless Minato told Kushina, and Minato was sworn to secrecy, then no, Inoichi replied. I'm not completely convinced that it was him. But short of seeing him kill a couple hundred Iwa nins with his signature moves, I don't know how else to have him prove it. Very well, I'll trust your judgment on this, but I do think it requires verification, the Hokage said. Now tell me more about Naruto's mindscape. And that was how we saved the drunken bridge builder, Naruto explained. Your first C rank turned into an A- rank mission? Minato asked incredulously. Remind me to have a talk with Kakashi about his behavior. Yeah, it was pretty awesome except for Haku and old man Zabuza dying, Naruto said. But they were trying to kill you. Julie exclaimed as she stripped the bodies of the dead and prepared her deceased partner's body for burial. Haku didn't want to, he just felt he had to do it, Naruto replied. And Zabuza was a good guy inside. Are you some kind of saint? She demanded in confusion. You just said he was called a demon for slaughtering a whole bunch of children. There's no way he was a good guy. He was crying for Haku when I told him off and he went and killed Gato, Naruto said defensively, crossing his arms in front of his chest. Logic is a foreign language to you, isn't it? She asked. That's not a polite thing to say to my son, Minato commented. It wasn't meant to be polite, it was meant to make a point, Julie replied. You might live in some kind of fantasy la land, but here in the capital wasteland, we have to do everything to survive day after day. We don't have a choice of doing anything else. Capital? This is a nation center? Minato asked. Well, used to be, a couple centuries back. War came, people got stupid and blew the whole world to smithereens, she explained. If you don't know about the Great War, then maybe you're telling the truth and you're not insane after all. She looked them over. And why do you two dress so funny, anyway? We're ninjas, Naruto said proudly. Bullshit. Ninjas wear black and sneak around in the night, Julie replied. You two stand out like a super mutant in an enclave pride parade. You've got some weird ideas about ninjas, Naruto said, giving her a strange look. Is standing out aside, why don't tell us a little more about the world we find ourselves in, Minato replied, giving his son's hair a playful ruffle. Well, okay, she said hesitantly. How should I start? She paused and thought about it for a while. Alright, at the beginning. War, she said, war never changes.